Have you ever wondered if maybe the United States could look completely different if one or two changes were made? If maybe a handful of decisions had gone another way? Most of us grow up believing that the map we know today was pretty much inevitable, right? These state lines never really changed. Every new state just joined the Union in neat, orderly succession until all 50 stars found their places on the flag. But hidden between the Revolution and the Constitution is the story of a place that believed it had already become a state, elected its own leaders, governed its own people, negotiated its own future, and then simply disappeared. Today, I'm going to be stepping into one of the strangest forgotten chapters in American history, where certainty was in desperate short supply, and the future seemed to change with every passing season. Join me today as I uncover the remarkable story of the lost state of Franklin and the question that nearly changed the United States forever. When we picture the end of the American Revolution, it's easy to imagine celebrations and treaties and a brand new nation that's now moving forward all together. Reality was far less settled. On August 23rd of 1784, delegates gathered in the frontier settlement of Jonesboro, west of the Appalachian Mountains, carrying concerns that had been building for years. They had fought through the uncertainty of the revolution, only to find themselves now living in a region that seemed forgotten by the governments that were making decisions hundreds of miles away. These communities faced dangers that Eastern politicians rarely experienced or really didn't understand, and they increasingly believed that their needs ranked somewhere near the bottom of everyone else's priorities. Distance has a curious way of changing relationships and perspectives. The mountains separated these settlers from the Atlantic states physically, but over time they also began separating them politically, economically, and emotionally. George Washington himself worried that those living beyond the mountains might become what he called, quote, a distant people. And standing in Jonesboro that summer, it was becoming difficult to argue with his very real concern. The confusion had begun months earlier when North Carolina voted to hand over its vast western territory to Congress as a payment toward the crushing debts left behind by the Revolutionary War. For lawmakers in the East, it may have seemed like a practical financial decision, but for the people who were actually living on that land, it felt like learning that your home had just become part of an accounting ledger that now belonged to somebody else. Rumors spread quickly across the frontier that Congress, struggling under enormous debt, might eventually sell this territory to Spain or to France. Whether those fears were fully justified mattered less than the fact that thousands of settlers believed them. Before long, North Carolina reconsidered and attempted to claim the territory, but trust had already been damaged. Once people began wondering whether someone else controls their entire future, reassurance just doesn't come back easily. The uncertainty pushed 4 counties then, the counties of Washington, Sullivan, Greene, and Spencer, toward kind of an extraordinary decision. Rather than waiting for distant governments to determine what was going to happen next, they announced, very boldly, I might add, that they would determine it themselves. They declared independence from the North Carolina state and chose Revolutionary War hero John Sevier to lead their new government. Their goal was not to leave the United States behind, though, quite the opposite. They wanted to become its 14th state. They organized courts, they elected officials, they drafted constitutions of their own, and they built machinery of government with remarkable speed. These people were very determined. Well, money remained scarce, so taxes could be paid with corn and tobacco and apple brandy and deer hides and other useful goods. It was a bartering sort of government. Frontier government was often practical before it was really elegant, and nobody standing in line with a bundle of hides probably imagined future historians would be talking about it more than 2 centuries later. But yet, here we are. Congress, however, proved to be far more difficult to persuade than the delegates there in this new state had hoped. Under the Articles of the Confederation, Franklin failed to receive enough votes for admission into the Union, which left its future suspended in uncertainty again. Yet to the leaders, they refused to abandon their vision. They continued governing as though statehood would eventually be granted to them, convinced that patience and persistence would carry them across the finish line. History happens in moments like these, when ordinary people continue moving forward despite having no guarantee that anyone else is going to recognize what they're building or what they're doing, and that it's even going to work. But as determined as Franklin's leaders were, they were about to make one surprising decision that revealed just how desperately they wanted acceptance, and it would become one of the most fascinating details in the entire story. That surprising decision was a simple change of name, but it revealed far more than it had first appeared to. The proposed state had originally been called Frankland, Frankland. At some point, its leaders quietly decided that Franklin might serve them better, Franklin. And that's no coincidence. The change was not accidental. It was an attempt to win the attention and perhaps the support and heart of Benjamin Franklin himself. If one of the most respected men in the American colonies and the American new states endorsed their cause, maybe Congress would finally listen. John Sevier even wrote directly to Benjamin Franklin, hoping for guidance and encouragement. Franklin's reply was polite and thoughtful and diplomatic, but it stopped well short of the endorsement that they had so desperately wanted. It was the kind of answer that closed no doors while opening none either. For a movement balanced on uncertainty, that silence spoke louder than an enthusiastic promise ever could. Still, Franklin refused to disappear. Its government continued meeting, first in Jonesboro and later in Greenville. Courts heard their cases, laws were enforced, taxes were collected in whatever way people could actually find available to them, whether that meant tobacco or corn or hides or apple brandy. It even functioned as what historians have described as a parallel government alongside of North Carolina after the state reasserted control over the territory. Imagine living in a place where two governments claimed authority over the same communities, the same people, the same townships, at the same time, each insisting it had legitimate power. Daily life continued because ordinary families still had crops to raise. They still had businesses to run, children to feed. But beneath that routine sat a lingering question that no one could really fully answer yet. Which government would be standing a year from now? A month from now? As the years passed, though, the pressure only increased. Yes, years. This kept on going on. Franklin attempted to negotiate its own agreements on the frontier and even explored the possibility of an alliance with Spain, not necessarily out of loyalty, but out of desperation. Leaders understood that survival often depends upon finding someone, anyone, willing to recognize your existence. Meanwhile, the federal government found itself wrestling with another uncomfortable reality. If Franklin succeeded, what would prevent other regions from doing exactly the same thing? The young republic had only recently won its independence from England, and already it faced the possibility that pieces of it might begin rearranging themselves and breaking themselves off of the board. The experiment that had seemed merely inconvenient was beginning to expose a weakness at the very center of this new nation. Then, almost quietly, everything unraveled. Support for Franklin slowly faded as more residents accepted North Carolina's offer to forgive unpaid taxes in exchange for rejoining the state. Political meetings became less frequent. The legislature eventually stopped meeting completely. By 1789, the lost state of Franklin had effectively ceased to exist, and North Carolina resumed control before the land later became part of the Southwest Territory and eventually Tennessee. John Sevier did not disappear into Franklin's collapse. In one of history's more remarkable turns, he would go on to become the first governor of Tennessee. The man who once led a state that never officially existed, that only counted of 4 counties, would later lead one that unquestionably did exist, boldly, and still does, and is actually where my husband partially grew up. But yet, Franklin's greatest legacy had almost nothing to do with the territory itself. The confusion, uncertainty, and its legal chaos surrounding its attempted statehood convinced the nation's founders that clearer rules were definitely needed for this sort of thing. When the United States Constitution was addressed, the admission of new states, it specifically required approval from both Congress and the affected state legislators before a new state could be carved from an existing one. Franklin never appeared as the 14th star on the flag, but its future helped to shape the process that every future state would eventually have to follow. Sometimes the chapters that seem to end in defeat actually rewrite the pages that become the entire following history afterward. When you look at a map today, it's easy to believe that every border was always destined to be exactly where it is now. And as you see it now, surprisingly, that's not always true either. The truth is that the state of Colorado is actually a zigzag surface all along the edge. Look that up sometime. Very interesting. The surveyors kept on forgetting to accommodate for the curvature of the earth. Anyway, the state of Franklin reminds us that history really rarely ever unfolds with that kind of real certainty to it. It's built from choices and compromise and ambitions and missed opportunities that often seem insignificant in the moment. Had only a few votes changed, had one influential letter carried a stronger endorsement, or had patience lasted just a little bit longer, the map of the United States might look completely different today. History often leaves behind more than places or names. It leaves behind possibilities. And those are often the hardest to forget. So if you'd been serving on Congress in 1785, knowing everything that you know, would you have voted to allow Franklin as the 14th state? Or would you have rejected it outright? Tell me why in the comments. And take a good look at the maps that are going to roll through in the end credits and some of the scenes and stuff. It's very, very interesting. Some of the images I was able to drag up on this. And of course, as always, if you enjoy stories like this, please make sure you do follow the History Happens with Amanda Blackwood Facebook page, because I do this every single day, and your likes, shares, follows, comments, all that stuff helps me to keep doing what it is that I do every day. Thank you for watching.